Prologue, The Ordinary Life of Charlie. The sun was just beginning to set over the sleepy town of Maplewood, casting long shadows across the quaint, tree-lined streets. In a modest house at the end of Sycamore Lane, Charlie, a seemingly ordinary beagle, lay sprawled on the couch, his brown and white fur blending into the worn fabric. To anyone else, Charlie was just a lazy, good-for-nothing dog, but little did they know, his life was about to take a dramatic turn. "Charlie, you lazy mutt, get off that couch." Mr. Thompson's voice boomed from the kitchen. The retired detective hobbled into the living room, a newspaper in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. "You're lucky you're cute, because you're useless otherwise." Charlie's ears perked up slightly, but he didn't move. He had heard this 1,000 times before. Mr. Thompson loved him, sure, but the old man had no idea what Charlie was capable of. Not yet, anyway. Sighing, Mr. Thompson dropped into his recliner, groaning as his joints protested. He unfolded the newspaper and scanned the headlines. "Another robbery at the warehouse district. That place is a hotbed for crime these days," he muttered to himself. Charlie yawned and stretched, finally deciding to grace the world with his presence. He jumped off the couch and padded over to Mr. Thompson, resting his head on the man's knee. All right, you're forgiven," Mr. Thompson chuckled, giving Charlie a pat. "You want to go for a walk?" Charlie's tail wagged furiously. A walk was just what he needed. As they made their way down Sycamore Lane, the familiar sights and smells of Maplewood surrounded them. Charlie loved this town, despite its quiet, unassuming nature. He had always felt there was more to his life than just being a pet, but he never imagined how right he was. As they passed the old warehouse district, Charlie's nose twitched. There was something in the air, a scent that didn't belong. He tugged on his leash, trying to investigate, but Mr. Thompson pulled him back. "Not today, boy. We're sticking to the main road," he said firmly. Charlie reluctantly obeyed, but his mind was racing. He had to find out what was going on. That night, as Mr. Thompson snored softly in his bedroom, Charlie lay on the couch, his mind restless. Suddenly, a voice echoed in his head, startling him awake. "Charlie, you've been chosen to activate the super canine system." Charlie blinked in confusion. "What? Who's there?" he barked softly, not wanting to wake Mr. Thompson. "Your days of pretending are over. You've been granted extraordinary abilities to protect and serve. Are you ready to accept this mission?" The voice continued, calm and authoritative. Charlie hesitated. "What's the catch?"
"No catch."
"Just the opportunity to be more than what you are," the voice responded. Charlie's curiosity got the better of him. "All right, I'm in." "Congratulations, Charlie. Your first upgrade. Enhanced sense of smell and agility. Use these powers wisely," the voice said, fading away. Just as the voice disappeared, Charlie's senses exploded with new information. He could smell Mrs. Thompson baking cookies from 3 blocks away and hear the faintest rustle of leaves outside. It was overwhelming, but thrilling at the same time. Excited yet apprehensive, Charlie decided to test his new abilities. He waited until the house was silent, then slipped out through the doggy door and made his way back to the warehouse district. His enhanced senses guided him to a particular building that smelled of danger. "All right, let's see what's going on," Charlie muttered to himself, feeling a surge of determination. He sneaked into the warehouse, his paws silent on the cold concrete floor. Inside, he saw a group of men huddled around a table, examining what looked like blueprints and stacks of money. The scent of explosives was unmistakable. "What are you doing here, dog?" A gruff voice interrupted Charlie's thoughts. He turned to see a burly man with a scar across his face towering over him. Charlie's heart raced, but he remembered the voice's words. Using his new agility, he darted past the man and hid behind a stack of crates. The man cursed and turned back to his comrades. We need to move this stuff out tonight. The cops are getting too close, the burly man growled. Charlie's mind raced. He had to warn Mr. Thompson, but how? He needed a distraction. Spotting a loose plank on the floor, he nudged it, causing a loud clatter. The men jumped up, their attention diverted. "Who's there?" one of them shouted, pulling out a flashlight. Charlie took his chance and bolted out of the warehouse, his paws barely touching the ground. He didn't stop running until he reached home, bursting through the doggy door and skidding to a stop in the living room. Mr. Thompson was already up, rubbing his eyes. "Charlie? What's gotten into you?" Charlie barked frantically, tugging at Mr. Thompson's sleeve with his teeth. All right, calm down," Mr. Thompson said, grabbing his coat. "Show me what's wrong." Charlie led Mr. Thompson back to the warehouse district. The old detective's eyes widened when he saw the men loading boxes into a van. "Stay here, Charlie," Mr. Thompson whispered, pulling out his phone to call the police. Charlie watched anxiously as Mr. Thompson relayed the information. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance, and the men scattered like cockroaches. The police arrived just in time to catch them red-handed. Mr. Thompson looked down at Charlie, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and confusion. "How did you know?" he murmured. Charlie wagged his tail, his secret safe for now. He had a feeling this was just the beginning of his adventures. With his new abilities, Charlie was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other. The next morning, Mr. Thompson couldn't stop talking about the night's events. "You're more than meets the eye, aren't you, buddy?" he said, scratching Charlie behind the ears. Charlie barked in agreement. Yes, he was more than just a lazy dog. He was Charlie, the super canine detective, and Maplewood had no idea what was coming. Chapter 1: The Awakening. The early morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the living room. Charlie lay in his usual spot on the couch, his mind racing with the events of the previous night. He had barely slept, overwhelmed by the new abilities he had discovered and the realization that he was no ordinary dog. Mr. Thompson shuffled into the room, yawning and stretching. He glanced at Charlie, who was unusually alert. "Morning, boy. Did you even sleep last night?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Charlie barked softly, his tail wagging in response. He couldn't exactly explain what had happened, but he had a feeling Mr. Thompson would figure it out soon enough. After breakfast, Mr. Thompson sat down with his coffee and newspaper, as was his routine. He glanced at the front page and sighed. Another robbery foiled at the warehouse district. Thanks to an anonymous tip, he read aloud, a small smile playing on his lips. "I wonder who that could have been." Charlie barked again, more insistently this time. He wanted Mr. Thompson to understand that it was him, but how? All right, I get it. You want to go for a walk," Mr. Thompson said, getting up and grabbing Charlie's leash. "Let's see what trouble you can sniff out today." As they strolled down Sycamore Lane, Charlie's enhanced senses were in overdrive. He could hear conversations from houses they passed, smell the aroma of breakfast cooking, and even detect the subtle scent of fear from a squirrel hiding in a nearby tree. It was exhilarating and a bit overwhelming. They made their way to the park, where Charlie usually liked to chase squirrels and play fetch. But today, his mind was elsewhere. He had a mission now, a purpose. He needed to understand his new abilities and how to use them effectively. "Come on, boy, fetch," Mr. Thompson called, throwing a stick. Charlie darted after the stick, his speed and agility surprising even himself. He reached the stick in record time, but something caught his attention. A group of kids were gathered around a tree, whispering excitedly. "Look at that dog. He's so fast," one of the kids exclaimed. Charlie puffed out his chest proudly, enjoying the admiration. But then he noticed something unusual. One of the kids was holding a small, frightened kitten. Hey, let it go, another kid said nervously. It looks scared. Why should I? The first kid sneered. It's just a dumb cat. Charlie growled low in his throat. He hated bullies, and he wasn't going to stand by and let this happen. He dropped the stick and trotted over to the group, barking loudly. The kids jumped back, startled. Whoa, calm down, dog, the bully said, but there was a hint of fear in his voice now. Charlie bared his teeth, his eyes locked on the kitten. The bully hesitated, then reluctantly set the kitten down. It darted away, disappearing into the bushes. Mr. Thompson, who had been watching from a distance, walked over, a proud smile on his face. Good job, Charlie. Always the protector, huh? Charlie barked happily, but his mind was still racing. He needed to test his abilities further to understand the extent of what he could do. And he knew just the place to do it. That evening, after Mr. Thompson had gone to bed, Charlie slipped out of the house and made his way back to the warehouse district. The memory of the burly man from the previous night still fresh in his mind, he knew there was more to uncover. As he approached the warehouse, his enhanced senses picked up on something unusual. Voices, faint but distinct, coming from inside. He crept closer, his ears straining to hear. I'm telling you, we need to move the goods tonight, a voice said urgently. The cops are onto us. Charlie recognized the voice. It was the same burly man from before. He edged closer, peering through a crack in the door. Inside, the man was talking to a smaller, nervous-looking accomplice. But where are we going to hide it? The smaller man asked, wringing his hands. We'll figure it out. Just start loading the van, the burly man replied. Charlie's mind raced. He needed to get this information to Mr. Thompson, but he couldn't risk being seen. He turned to leave, but his paw knocked against a loose piece of metal, sending it clattering to the ground. What was that? The burly man snapped, turning towards the door. Charlie froze, his heart pounding. He had to think fast. Using his enhanced agility, he darted away, hoping to disappear into the shadows. Get that dog, the burly man shouted, and the smaller man scrambled after Charlie. Charlie ran as fast as he could, weaving through the maze of crates and boxes. His mind was focused on one thing, getting back to Mr. Thompson and warning him. But as he turned a corner, he found himself face to face with a tall, chain-link fence. He skidded to a stop, his heart sinking. There you are, the smaller man said, catching up to him. Thought you could get away, huh? Charlie growled, his eyes darting around for an escape route. He noticed a small gap at the bottom of the fence, just big enough for him to squeeze through. He lunged for it, but the man grabbed his tail, yanking him back. Not so fast, Mutt, the man sneered. Charlie twisted and turned, using his new strength to break free. He managed to slip through the gap and took off running, the man's shouts fading into the distance. When he finally reached home, he was panting and exhausted. He scratched at the door, and Mr. Thompson opened it, his face etched with worry. Charlie, where have you been? He demanded. I was worried sick. Charlie barked frantically, trying to convey the urgency of the situation. Mr. Thompson frowned, then seemed to understand. All right, boy, show me. Charlie led Mr. Thompson back to the warehouse district, his heart pounding with anticipation. He had to make sure Mr. Thompson saw what was going on. As they approached the warehouse, they saw the men loading boxes into a van. Mr. Thompson's eyes widened, and he pulled out his phone to call the police. We need backup at the old warehouse district, he said, his voice steady despite the tension. Hurry. They hid behind a stack of crates, waiting for the police to arrive. Charlie's heart raced as the minutes ticked by. Finally, the sound of sirens filled the air, and the men scrambled to escape. The police swarmed the area, arresting the burly man and his accomplice. Mr. Thompson looked down at Charlie, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and confusion. "You did it again, didn't you, boy?" he murmured. Charlie barked in agreement, his tail wagging furiously. He had a feeling this was just the beginning of his adventures. With his new abilities, Charlie was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other. Chapter 2: Discovering New Powers. The morning sun streamed through the curtains, casting a golden hue over the living room. Charlie lay in his usual spot on the couch, contemplating the events of the past 2 days. The thrill of using his new abilities and helping Mr. Thompson solve crimes was exhilarating, but he knew he had only scratched the surface of what he could do. Mr. Thompson entered the room, a cup of coffee in hand, and gave Charlie a curious look. "Morning, boy. You've been acting strange lately. Anything you want to tell me?" he asked with a chuckle, knowing full well Charlie couldn't respond. Charlie barked softly, his eyes filled with determination. He had to find a way to communicate with Mr. Thompson, to show him that he was more than just a lazy dog. As they finished breakfast, Mr. Thompson grabbed Charlie's leash. "Come on, let's go for a walk. Maybe some fresh air will clear your head." Charlie eagerly followed, his mind racing with possibilities. As they strolled down Sycamore Lane, he decided to test his enhanced senses. He could smell everything more vividly now: the flowers blooming in the gardens, the freshly baked bread from Mrs. Thompson's bakery, even the faint scent of perfume from a passerby. "You're pulling like a madman today," Mr. Thompson remarked as Charlie tugged on the leash, trying to follow various scents. "What's gotten into you?" Charlie stopped abruptly, his nose twitching as he caught a familiar, unsettling scent. It was the same scent he had picked up at the warehouse: explosives. He barked urgently, trying to convey the danger. "What is it, boy?" Mr. Thompson asked, frowning as he followed Charlie's gaze. "You smell something?" Charlie barked again, more insistently this time, and began pulling Mr. Thompson towards the source of the scent. They made their way through the park, past the playground, and into a dense thicket of trees. "Charlie, slow down," Mr. Thompson called, struggling to keep up. But Charlie was relentless, his senses guiding him to a secluded area where an old, abandoned shed stood. Mr. Thompson's eyes widened as he saw the shed. "What is it, boy? What's in there?" Charlie barked and scratched at the door, indicating that something dangerous was inside. Mr. Thompson approached cautiously, his hand resting on the handle of the door. He slowly opened it, and they were met with a sight that sent chills down their spines. Inside the shed were stacks of boxes, all marked with the same symbol Charlie had seen at the warehouse. The scent of explosives was overwhelming. "Good God," Mr. Thompson whispered. "This is a bomb stash." Charlie barked urgently, trying to convey the immediate danger. They had to do something, and fast. Mr. Thompson pulled out his phone and called the police. "This is Thompson. I've found a shed full of explosives in Maplewood Park. We need a bomb squad here immediately." As they waited for the police to arrive, Mr. Thompson paced nervously. "How did you know about this, Charlie? How did you find it?" Charlie whined softly, wishing he could explain. He needed to show Mr. Thompson that he was more than just a regular dog. But how? The police arrived within minutes, their sirens blaring. The bomb squad quickly secured the area, carefully removing the explosives from the shed. Mr. Thompson and Charlie watched from a safe distance, relief washing over them. One of the officers approached Mr. Thompson. "Good work finding this. How did you know?" Mr. Thompson glanced at Charlie, a proud smile on his face. "It was all him. My dog, Charlie, found it." The officer raised an eyebrow, looking down at Charlie. "That's one smart dog you've got there." Mr. Thompson nodded, scratching Charlie behind the ears. "Yeah, he is." As they walked home, Mr. Thompson couldn't stop talking about the discovery. "You really are something special, Charlie." I don't know how you do it, but I'm glad you do. Charlie barked happily, his tail wagging furiously. He knew he had only just begun to understand his new abilities, but he was determined to use them to help Mr. Thompson and protect their town. Later that evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Mr. Thompson turned to Charlie with a thoughtful expression. You know, boy, I think there's more to you than meets the eye. I don't know how you found those explosives, but I'm beginning to believe there's something extraordinary about you. Charlie met Mr. Thompson's gaze, his eyes filled with a silent understanding. He knew it was time to reveal more about his abilities. He had to show Mr. Thompson that he was capable of much more. The next morning, Charlie decided to put his plan into action. He waited for Mr. Thompson to settle down with his coffee and newspaper, then trotted over to the bookshelf. Using his enhanced agility, he jumped onto a chair, then onto the table, knocking a book to the floor. Mr. Thompson looked up in surprise. What are you doing, Charlie? Charlie barked and nudged the book towards Mr. Thompson with his nose. It was an old detective manual, filled with techniques and strategies that Mr. Thompson had used in his career. Mr. Thompson picked up the book, his brow furrowing. You want me to read this? Charlie barked again, then darted to the door, scratching at it. All right, I get it, Mr. Thompson said, getting up. You want to go on another adventure, don't you? Charlie wagged his tail, his excitement palpable. He led Mr. Thompson outside, his enhanced senses guiding him once more. This time, he picked up a different scent, one of desperation and fear. They followed the trail through town, eventually arriving at a rundown apartment building. Charlie could hear faint cries coming from inside. He nudged Mr. Thompson, who immediately understood. Someone's in trouble, Mr. Thompson said, his detective instincts kicking in. They rushed inside, following the sound of the cries. In a small, dimly lit apartment, they found a young woman sitting on the floor, clutching a baby in her arms. Her face was streaked with tears, and she looked up in desperation as they entered. Please help me, she begged. My husband, he's dangerous. He's coming back soon, and I don't know what to do. Mr. Thompson knelt beside her, his voice gentle. It's all right. We're here to help. Let's get you out of here. Charlie stood guard, his senses on high alert. He could hear footsteps approaching the building, heavy and menacing. He barked urgently, warning Mr. Thompson. We need to move now, Mr. Thompson said, helping the woman to her feet. Charlie, lead the way. Charlie led them out the back door, his ears picking up the sound of the man entering the building. They moved quickly and quietly, slipping into the alley and making their way to safety. Once they were far enough away, Mr. Thompson called the police, giving them the details. There's a woman in danger at the apartment building on Maplewood Street. Her husband is violent. Please send someone immediately. The woman looked at Mr. Thompson and Charlie with gratitude. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you. Mr. Thompson smiled, glancing down at Charlie. It's all thanks to him. He's the real hero. Charlie barked softly, his heart swelling with pride. He knew that with his new abilities, he could make a real difference. He was more than just a lazy dog. He was a protector, a detective, and a hero. As they walked home, Mr. Thompson patted Charlie on the head. You really are something special, boy. I don't know how you do it, but I'm glad you're here. Charlie wagged his tail, his determination renewed. He knew there were more challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them. With Mr. Thompson by his side, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. That night, as they settled down by the fireplace, Mr. Thompson turned to Charlie with a serious expression. You know, boy, I think it's time we start working together more closely. There's a lot of trouble out there, and I have a feeling you're the key to solving it. Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. He was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other. And with Mr. Thompson by his side, he knew they could face any challenge that came their way. Chapter 3: A Suspicious Scent. The following day, Maplewood was buzzing with news of the foiled bombing plot and the mysterious discovery of the explosives. The townspeople marveled at the unexpected heroism of Mr. Thompson and his dog, Charlie. As they walked down Sycamore Lane, neighbors waved and congratulated them, their faces filled with admiration. "You're quite the hero, Thompson," Mrs. Henderson said, leaning over her garden fence. "And that dog of yours. Who knew he had it in him?" Mr. Thompson smiled modestly, giving Charlie a pat. "He's full of surprises, that's for sure." Charlie wagged his tail, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was at play. His enhanced senses had picked up on a faint but persistent scent during their discovery at the shed, a scent that didn't quite fit. It was a mix of chemicals and something metallic, a smell that now seemed to follow him everywhere. Later that evening, as Mr. Thompson read by the fireplace, Charlie lay on the rug, lost in thought. He needed to investigate further, to understand what this new scent meant. He decided to wait until Mr. Thompson was asleep before sneaking out. Around midnight, the house was silent. Charlie slipped out through the doggy door and made his way back to the warehouse district. His nose guided him to a different part of town this time, a rundown industrial area that was rarely visited. As he approached an old factory, the scent grew stronger. Charlie sniffed the air, his ears perked in alertness. There was something inside, something dangerous. He crept closer, his heart pounding in his chest. Suddenly, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and a voice called out, "Who's there?" Charlie froze, his eyes adjusting to the light. He saw a man standing at the entrance of the factory, his expression suspicious. The man moved closer, his flashlight revealing a scarred face and cold eyes, the same burly man from the warehouse. "You again," the man growled, recognizing Charlie. "Thought you could escape last time, huh? Well, not tonight." Charlie's heart raced. He needed to get away, but the man was blocking his path. He darted to the side, trying to find another exit, but the man lunged at him, grabbing his collar. "Not so fast, Mutt," the man sneered, tightening his grip. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long." Charlie struggled, using his enhanced strength to break free. He managed to twist out of the man's grasp and bolted into the factory. He had to find out what was going on, and fast. Inside, the factory was a maze of machinery and shadowy corners. Charlie sniffed the air, his senses guiding him to a room at the back. The scent of chemicals and metal was overwhelming now. He pushed open the door with his nose and found himself in a makeshift lab. Boxes of chemicals and strange devices filled the room. In the center was a table covered in blueprints and vials of liquid. Charlie's eyes widened as he realized the scale of what he had stumbled upon. This was more than just a stash of explosives. It was a full-scale operation to create something far more dangerous. Before he could investigate further, the door slammed shut behind him. The burly man stood there, a sinister smile on his face. "You're a clever dog, I'll give you that. But now you're trapped." Charlie growled, his mind racing. He needed to get out of there and warn Mr. Thompson, but the man blocked his only exit. The room was filled with potential weapons, but Charlie was just a dog. What could he do? The man stepped closer, reaching for a metal rod on the table. "Time to teach you a lesson." Just as he swung the rod, Charlie leaped to the side, dodging the blow. He knocked over a stack of boxes, causing a loud crash. The man cursed and swung again, but Charlie was too quick. He used his enhanced agility to dart around the room, knocking over equipment and causing chaos. In the commotion, Charlie noticed a small window high up on the wall. It was his only chance. He made a dash for the table, leaping onto it and using it as a springboard to reach the window ledge. "Get back here," the man shouted, swinging the rod wildly. Charlie squeezed through the window, the man's curses fading behind him. He landed outside, his heart pounding with adrenaline. He had to get back to Mr. Thompson and warn him about the lab. As he ran through the streets, his mind raced with thoughts of what he had seen. This operation was bigger than he had imagined, and it was clear that the man was just a small part of a larger scheme. He needed to uncover the truth before it was too late. When he finally reached home, he scratched at the door, his body trembling with exhaustion. Mr. Thompson opened it, his eyes wide with concern. "Charlie? What happened?" Charlie barked frantically, trying to convey the urgency of the situation. He tugged at Mr. Thompson's sleeve, leading him to the living room where he could find paper and a pen. Mr. Thompson frowned, but followed Charlie's lead. "What is it, boy? You need to show me something?" Charlie nudged the pen towards him, then sat down, his eyes pleading. Mr. Thompson hesitated for a moment, then picked up the pen and paper. "All right, let's see if I can figure this out." Charlie began barking and moving around the room, trying to communicate what he had seen. Mr. Thompson watched closely, jotting down notes. "A lab, chemicals, metal," he muttered, piecing together the clues. Suddenly, Mr. Thompson's eyes widened. "You found another hideout, didn't you? A lab where they're making something dangerous." Charlie barked in agreement, his tail wagging furiously. He had managed to convey the message, but now they needed to act. Mr. Thompson grabbed his coat and his phone. "We need to call the police. They need to know about this right away." As Mr. Thompson made the call, Charlie paced nervously. He knew the burly man wouldn't stop until his operation was complete. They had to stop him and uncover who was behind it all. Within minutes, the police arrived, and Mr. Thompson led them to the factory. They stormed the building, apprehending the burly man and his accomplices. The lab was dismantled, and the chemicals were safely removed. An officer approached Mr. Thompson, shaking his head in disbelief. "This is incredible. How did you find this place?" Mr. Thompson glanced at Charlie, pride shining in his eyes. "It was all him. My dog, Charlie. He's more than just a pet. He's a hero." The officer smiled, looking down at Charlie with admiration. "You've got quite the partner there, Thompson. We'll take it from here." As they walked home, Mr. Thompson couldn't stop talking about the night's events. "You're amazing, Charlie. I don't know how you do it, but I'm glad you're on our side." Charlie barked happily, his heart swelling with pride. He knew there were more challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them. With Mr. Thompson by his side, they could overcome anything. That night, as they settled down by the fireplace, Mr. Thompson turned to Charlie with a serious expression. "We've got to be more vigilant, boy. There's a bigger threat out there, and I have a feeling we've only just scratched the surface." Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. He was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other. And with Mr. Thompson by his side, he knew they could face any challenge that came their way. Chapter 4: The Confrontation. The sun had barely risen over Maplewood, casting a pale light over the quiet town. Inside the Thompson household, Charlie lay on his favorite rug, his mind racing with thoughts of the previous night. The discovery of the lab and the capture of the burly man had been a significant victory, but he knew that the real mastermind was still out there. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were just pawns in a much larger game. Mr. Thompson shuffled into the living room, rubbing his eyes and yawning. He gave Charlie a tired smile. "Morning, boy. You've been busy lately, haven't you?" Charlie barked softly, his eyes filled with determination. He was ready for whatever came next, and he knew Mr. Thompson was too. After breakfast, they went for their usual walk, but this time, Charlie was more alert than ever. His enhanced senses were on high alert, scanning for any signs of danger. As they strolled down Sycamore Lane, Charlie's nose picked up a familiar scent, a mix of chemicals and something metallic. It was faint but unmistakable. "What is it, boy?" Mr. Thompson asked, noticing Charlie's sudden tension. Charlie barked and pulled on the leash, leading Mr. Thompson towards the source of the scent. They made their way to a secluded part of town where an old, abandoned warehouse stood. The scent grew stronger as they approached, and Charlie's heart raced with anticipation. Mr. Thompson frowned, his detective instincts kicking in. "This place again? What's going on here?" Charlie barked urgently, trying to convey the danger. They needed to investigate further, but this time, they had to be careful. As they entered the warehouse, Charlie's enhanced senses picked up on something unusual. There were voices coming from deeper inside, faint but distinct. He led Mr. Thompson through the maze of crates and machinery, his ears straining to hear. "I'm telling you, we need to move the operation. The cops are onto us," a voice said urgently. "We can't just leave everything behind," another voice replied. "We need to finish what we started." Charlie recognized the voices. They belonged to the burly man's accomplices. He growled softly, his eyes narrowing. They were up to something, and he had to stop them. Mr. Thompson crouched beside Charlie, listening intently. "We need to get closer," he whispered. "Stay low and quiet." They crept closer, hiding behind a stack of crates. Peering through the gaps, they saw a group of men huddled around a table, examining blueprints and discussing their next move. "We need to get these chemicals out of here before the cops find them," one of the men said. "We can't afford another raid." The leader, a tall man with sharp features and cold eyes, nodded. "Agreed. We'll move everything tonight. Make sure nothing is left behind." Charlie's mind raced. They had to stop them before they could relocate the operation. He nudged Mr. Thompson, who nodded in understanding. "Stay here," Mr. Thompson whispered. "I'm going to call for backup." As Mr. Thompson moved to call the police, Charlie kept watch, his eyes never leaving the group of men. He knew they were dangerous, and he couldn't let them get away. Suddenly, the leader's eyes darted towards their hiding spot. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice sharp. The men looked around, their expressions tense. "I don't see anything," one of them said. "Check it out," the leader ordered. "We can't take any chances." Charlie's heart pounded as one of the men approached their hiding spot. He knew he had to act fast. Using his enhanced agility, he darted out from behind the crates, knocking over a stack of boxes to create a distraction. "What the?" the man exclaimed, stumbling back. Charlie barked loudly, drawing their attention away from Mr. Thompson. He darted around the warehouse, knocking over more crates and causing chaos. "Get that dog," the leader shouted, his face contorted with rage. The men scrambled to catch Charlie, but he was too fast. He led them on a wild chase, weaving through the machinery and using his enhanced strength to knock over obstacles in their path. In the midst of the chaos, Mr. Thompson managed to call the police. "We need backup at the old warehouse on Maplewood Street. There's a group of men here, planning to move dangerous chemicals. Hurry." Charlie continued to lead the men on a wild goose chase, his heart pounding with adrenaline. He knew he couldn't keep this up forever, but he had to buy time for the police to arrive. Just as he felt his energy waning, he heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Relief washed over him, and he made one final dash towards the exit, leading the men right into the waiting arms of the police. "Freeze!" an officer shouted, his gun drawn. The men skidded to a halt, their faces pale with fear. They raised their hands in surrender as the police swarmed the warehouse, apprehending them one by one. Mr. Thompson rushed to Charlie's side, his eyes filled with pride and concern. "You did it, boy. You bought us enough time." Charlie barked softly, his tail wagging. He had done it. He had stopped the men and protected their town once again. As the police secured the warehouse and removed the chemicals, the leader was led away in handcuffs, his expression cold and defiant. "You haven't won," he snarled at Mr. Thompson. "This is far from over." Mr. Thompson's eyes narrowed. "We'll be ready." Later that evening, back at home, Mr. Thompson and Charlie sat by the fireplace, reflecting on the day's events. Mr. Thompson turned to Charlie, his expression serious. "We've uncovered something big, boy. There's a larger operation at play here, and I have a feeling it goes all the way to the top." Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. He knew their work was far from over, but he was ready for whatever came next. "From now on, we're partners," Mr. Thompson said, extending his hand to Charlie. "We'll work together to protect this town and uncover the truth." Charlie placed his paw in Mr. Thompson's hand, a silent promise passing between them. They were a team now, ready to face any challenge that came their way. That night, as they settled down to sleep, Charlie's mind was filled with thoughts of the future. He knew there were more dangers ahead, but with Mr. Thompson by his side, he was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other. Chapter 5. Warning Mr. Thompson. The next morning, Maplewood buzzed with news of the raid at the old warehouse. Headlines praised Mr. Thompson and his incredible dog, Charlie, for their bravery and quick thinking. But despite the accolades, Mr. Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. Charlie sensed his owner's unease as they went about their morning routine. He nuzzled Mr. Thompson's hand, offering silent reassurance. "Thanks, boy," Mr. Thompson said, giving Charlie a pat. "But I can't help feeling like there's more to this." The leader's last words still haunt me. Charlie barked softly, sharing his owner's concern. They had to dig deeper and uncover the true mastermind behind the operation. After breakfast, they decided to visit the police station to gather more information. As they walked, Charlie's enhanced senses were on high alert, scanning for any signs of danger. He could feel that they were being watched, but couldn't pinpoint the source. At the station, they were greeted by Officer Daniels, who had been instrumental in the raid. "Mr. Thompson, Charlie, good to see you," he said with a warm smile. "We owe you both a lot." "Thank you, Officer Daniels," Mr. Thompson replied. "But I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this." The leader's last words, "This is far from over," they bother me. Officer Daniels nodded, his expression serious. "We've been looking into it." The leader, Jacob Stark, is a known associate of a larger crime syndicate. "We believe they're planning something big, but we don't have concrete evidence yet." Charlie growled softly, sensing the gravity of the situation. He knew they had to act quickly before it was too late. Mr. Thompson's face hardened with determination. "We need to find out what they're planning and stop it, whatever it takes." Officer Daniels nodded in agreement. "We'll do everything we can, Mr. Thompson. In the meantime, be careful. Stark's men might come after you." Charlie barked, indicating that they understood the danger. As they left the station, Mr. Thompson's mind raced with possibilities. They had to find a lead, something that would point them in the right direction. That evening, as they walked through the park, Charlie's enhanced senses picked up a familiar scent, the same mix of chemicals and metal that had led them to the warehouse. He tugged on the leash, leading Mr. Thompson towards a cluster of trees at the edge of the park. "What is it, boy?" Mr. Thompson asked, following Charlie's lead. Charlie sniffed the ground, his nose guiding him to a hidden trapdoor. He barked urgently, alerting Mr. Thompson to his discovery. "A trapdoor? In the park?" Mr. Thompson muttered, crouching down to examine it. "What are they hiding?" He carefully lifted the door, revealing a narrow staircase leading underground. The scent of chemicals grew stronger, confirming Charlie's suspicions. They had stumbled upon another hideout. "We need to check this out, but we have to be cautious," Mr. Thompson said, grabbing a flashlight from his bag. "Stay close, Charlie." They descended the stairs, the air growing colder and more pungent with each step. At the bottom, they found themselves in a dimly lit tunnel lined with crates and barrels. The sound of distant voices echoed through the passage, and Charlie's ears perked up, trying to catch every word. "Everything's set for tomorrow night," a voice said. "The shipment will arrive at the docks, and we'll distribute the goods from there." "Good," another voice replied. "Make sure there are no loose ends. We can't afford any mistakes." Mr. Thompson and Charlie exchanged a glance. This was it, the lead they needed. But they had to act fast. If the shipment was arriving tomorrow night, they had less than 24 hours to stop it. They quietly retraced their steps and exited the tunnel, sealing the trapdoor behind them. Once they were safely back in the park, Mr. Thompson called Officer Daniels, briefing him on their discovery. "We found another hideout under the park," Mr. Thompson said. "They're planning a shipment for tomorrow night at the docks." Officer Daniels' voice was tense. "We'll set up a sting operation and catch them in the act. Thanks for the tip, Mr. Thompson. Stay safe and keep an eye on Charlie. These guys won't take kindly to being outsmarted." That night, as they prepared for the operation, Mr. Thompson couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. He looked at Charlie, who seemed equally on edge. "Whatever happens, boy, we have to be ready," he said softly, giving Charlie a reassuring pat. The next evening, under the cover of darkness, Mr. Thompson and Charlie joined the police at the docks. The air was thick with tension as they waited for the shipment to arrive. Charlie's enhanced senses were on high alert, scanning the area for any signs of movement. "Remember, the element of surprise is on our side," Officer Daniels whispered. "Wait for my signal." Minutes felt like hours as they lay in wait. Finally, the sound of an approaching boat broke the silence. Charlie's ears perked up, and he nudged Mr. Thompson, indicating that the time had come. A group of men began unloading crates from the boat, their movements quick and efficient. Among them was Jacob Stark, his sharp features illuminated by the dock lights. "Now," Officer Daniels whispered, and the police sprang into action. "Freeze! Police!" Officer Daniels shouted, his gun drawn. Panic ensued as the men scrambled to escape. Stark's eyes widened with fury as he realized they had been caught. "It's that damn dog again," he snarled, pointing at Charlie. "Get him." One of Stark's men lunged at Charlie, but the dog was too quick. Using his enhanced agility, he dodged the attack and led the man on a wild chase around the docks. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson and the police moved in to secure the area and apprehend the criminals. Stark made a break for it, darting towards a waiting car. Charlie saw him and barked, alerting Mr. Thompson. "He's getting away," Mr. Thompson shouted, giving chase. Charlie sprinted after Stark, his paws pounding against the concrete. He had to stop him. With a burst of speed, he leaped and latched onto Stark's pant leg, bringing him to the ground. "Get off me, you mutt," Stark yelled, struggling to free himself. Mr. Thompson caught up, grabbing Stark's arms and securing him with handcuffs. "You're not going anywhere, Stark," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The police quickly took control of the situation, arresting the remaining men and securing the shipment. Officer Daniels approached Mr. Thompson and Charlie, a look of admiration on his face. "You two did it again," he said, clapping Mr. Thompson on the shoulder. "We couldn't have done this without you." Mr. Thompson smiled, looking down at Charlie. "It's all thanks to him. He's the real hero." Charlie barked happily, his tail wagging furiously. He had done it. He had stopped Stark and his men and protected their town once again. As they walked home, the weight of the night's events settled over them. Mr. Thompson knew they had made a powerful enemy in Stark, but he also knew they were stronger together. "There's more to this, boy," Mr. Thompson said, his voice thoughtful. Stark was just a piece of the puzzle. We need to find out who's really behind all this. Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes filled with determination. He was ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead, confident in their ability to overcome them together. That night, as they settled down by the fireplace, Mr. Thompson turned to Charlie with a serious expression. "We've got to be more vigilant, boy. There's a bigger threat out there, and I have a feeling we've only just scratched the surface." Charlie barked softly, his heart swelling with pride and determination. He was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other. And with Mr. Thompson by his side, he knew they could face any challenge that came their way. Chapter 6: The Aftermath. The next morning, the town of Maplewood was once again buzzing with the news of the dramatic bust at the docks. Mr. Thompson and Charlie were hailed as heroes, but despite the praise, Mr. Thompson couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that lingered. They had stopped Jacob Stark, but the mastermind behind the operation was still at large. As Mr. Thompson sat in his living room, sipping his morning coffee and reading the paper, Charlie lay at his feet, his senses on high alert. The headlines praised their bravery, but Mr. Thompson's mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the night before. "We did good, boy," he said, looking down at Charlie. "But I have a feeling this is far from over." Charlie barked softly, his eyes filled with determination. He shared Mr. Thompson's concerns. They had to dig deeper and uncover the true mastermind behind the operation. Just then, the phone rang, jolting Mr. Thompson from his thoughts. He picked it up, recognizing Officer Daniels' voice on the other end. "Thompson, we need to talk. Can you come down to the station?" "On our way," Mr. Thompson replied, hanging up the phone. He glanced at Charlie. "Looks like we're not done yet, boy." At the police station, Officer Daniels greeted them with a serious expression. "We've interrogated Stark, but he's not talking. However, we did find something interesting on him." Officer Daniels led them to an interrogation room where Stark sat, his face bruised and defiant. On the table in front of him was a piece of paper covered in strange symbols and codes. "What's this?" Mr. Thompson asked, picking up the paper. "We're not sure," Officer Daniels replied. "It looks like some kind of cipher, but we haven't been able to crack it." Charlie sniffed the paper, his enhanced senses picking up faint traces of ink and chemicals. He barked, nudging Mr. Thompson's hand. Mr. Thompson's eyes widened. "Charlie, you think you can figure this out?" Charlie barked again, more insistently. Mr. Thompson took the paper and examined it closely. "It's worth a shot." They spent the next few hours poring over the symbols, trying different combinations and methods. Charlie's heightened senses and instincts guided them, helping to piece together the puzzle. Finally, they managed to decipher a portion of the code. "It's a location," Mr. Thompson said, his voice tinged with excitement. "An address in the industrial district." Officer Daniels nodded. "We'll need to check it out. But we have to be careful. If this is where the mastermind is operating from, it's bound to be heavily guarded." That evening, under the cover of darkness, Mr. Thompson and Charlie joined a team of officers as they approached the address. The industrial district was quiet, the buildings looming ominously in the moonlight. Charlie's ears perked up as they neared the building. He could hear faint voices and the hum of machinery. His nose picked up the familiar scent of chemicals and metal. They were in the right place. "Stay sharp," Officer Daniels whispered. "We go in quietly. We need to catch them by surprise." They moved silently, approaching the building from different angles. As they neared the entrance, a guard spotted them and raised the alarm. Chaos erupted as the guards scrambled to defend the building. "Move in," Officer Daniels shouted, and the officers rushed forward. Charlie darted ahead, using his enhanced agility to weave through the chaos. He had to find the mastermind and stop them before they could escape. He followed the scent trail through a maze of corridors, his heart pounding with determination. As he rounded a corner, he came face to face with a tall, imposing figure. The man's eyes were cold and calculating, his expression twisted with anger. "So, you're the one who's been causing all this trouble," he sneered. Charlie growled, his hackles raised. He knew this was the mastermind behind the operation. The man pulled out a gun, aiming it at Charlie. "You're not going to stop me, dog." Charlie's mind raced. He had to act fast. Using his enhanced strength and speed, he lunged at the man, knocking the gun from his hand. The man staggered back, cursing as he tried to regain his balance. "Get off me," the man shouted, struggling to free himself. Charlie held his ground, his teeth bared in a fierce snarl. He wasn't going to let this man escape. Just then, Mr. Thompson and Officer Daniels arrived, their faces grim with determination. "Drop it," Mr. Thompson ordered, his voice steady. The man sneered, but he knew he was outnumbered. He raised his hands in surrender, his eyes filled with hatred. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." Mr. Thompson and Officer Daniels quickly secured the man in handcuffs. "We'll see about that," Officer Daniels said, his voice cold. As they led the man away, Mr. Thompson knelt beside Charlie, his eyes filled with pride. "You did it, boy. You found him." Charlie barked softly, his tail wagging. He had stopped the mastermind and protected their town once again. Back at the station, the man was identified as Victor Kane, a notorious criminal mastermind with ties to numerous illegal operations. The officers worked through the night, gathering evidence and dismantling the rest of Kane's network. The next morning, as they returned home, Mr. Thompson and Charlie were greeted by the townspeople, their faces filled with gratitude and admiration. "You two are amazing," Mrs. Henderson said, giving Charlie a pat. "We're lucky to have you." Mr. Thompson smiled, looking down at Charlie. "It's all thanks to him. He's the real hero." Charlie barked happily, his heart swelling with pride. He knew there were more challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them. With Mr. Thompson by his side, they could overcome anything. That night, as they sat by the fireplace, Mr. Thompson turned to Charlie with a serious expression. "We did good, boy. But we have to stay vigilant. There's always more to uncover, more threats to face." Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. He was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other. And with Mr. Thompson by his side, he knew they could face any challenge that came their way. Chapter 7. Mr. Thompson's Discovery. The news of Victor Kane's arrest spread quickly through Maplewood. The townspeople were relieved that the notorious criminal was behind bars, but for Mr. Thompson and Charlie, the victory felt bittersweet. They had uncovered a significant threat, but the nagging feeling that there was more to the story remained. Days passed, and the town slowly returned to its peaceful routine. Mr. Thompson and Charlie resumed their morning walks, but the sense of vigilance never left them. One morning, as they strolled down Sycamore Lane, they were approached by Officer Daniels, who looked unusually serious. "Thompson, Charlie," he greeted them. "Can we talk?" Mr. Thompson nodded, his expression tense. "Of course. What's going on?" Officer Daniels glanced around, lowering his voice. "We've been going through the evidence we collected from Kane's hideout. There's something you need to see." They followed Officer Daniels to the police station, where he led them to a conference room. On the table were stacks of documents, photos, and a large map of Maplewood with several locations marked. "What is all this?" Mr. Thompson asked, his eyes scanning the materials. Officer Daniels sighed. "We found detailed plans for several more operations, all connected to Kane's network. It looks like he was just a small part of a much larger organization." Charlie sniffed the documents, his nose picking up traces of chemicals and ink. He barked softly, indicating that he sensed something important. "We believe there are more cells operating in and around Maplewood," Officer Daniels continued. "And they're planning something big." Mr. Thompson's eyes widened. "What do you mean, something big?" Officer Daniels pointed to the map. "We intercepted some communications that suggest a coordinated attack. They're targeting key locations around town, schools, hospitals, government buildings. We don't know exactly when, but it could be soon." Charlie growled, his hackles raised. The thought of innocent lives being in danger filled him with determination. They had to stop this. "We need to warn people and increase security," Mr. Thompson said, his voice steady. "But we also need to find out who's behind this and put an end to it." Officer Daniels nodded. "Agreed. We're setting up a task force to investigate further. We could use your help, Thompson and Charlie's." Mr. Thompson looked down at Charlie, who barked in agreement. "We're in. Whatever it takes." Over the next few days, Mr. Thompson and Charlie worked tirelessly with the police, gathering information and tracking down leads. They visited the marked locations on the map, looking for any signs of suspicious activity. Charlie's enhanced senses proved invaluable, guiding them to hidden clues and overheard conversations. One evening, as they returned home, Mr. Thompson's phone rang. It was Officer Daniels. "Thompson, we've got a lead. One of our informants has identified a safe house used by the organization. It's in the old factory district." "We're on our way," Mr. Thompson replied, grabbing his coat. He turned to Charlie. "Looks like we've got work to do, boy." They arrived at the factory district under the cover of darkness. The area was eerily quiet, the old buildings casting long shadows in the moonlight. Officer Daniels and a team of officers were already there, waiting for them. "The safe house is in that building," Officer Daniels said, pointing to a rundown warehouse. "We believe the leader of this cell is inside." Charlie sniffed the air, picking up the familiar scent of chemicals and metal. He growled softly, his body tense with anticipation. "Be careful," Officer Daniels warned. "We don't know how many are inside or what they're armed with." Mr. Thompson nodded. "We'll be ready." They approached the warehouse cautiously, moving silently through the shadows. Charlie's ears perked up, picking up faint voices from inside. He led the team to a side entrance, where they could hear the conversation more clearly. "We need to move the supplies tonight," a voice said. "The boss wants everything ready for the big event." "Relax, we've got time," another voice replied. "The cops are clueless. They'll never see it coming." Mr. Thompson's heart pounded. They were planning an attack, and it was happening soon. He signaled to the team, and they prepared to move in. "Go!" Officer Daniels shouted, and the officers burst through the door, guns drawn. "Freeze! Police!" they shouted, their voices echoing through the warehouse. Panic ensued as the criminals scrambled to escape. Charlie darted ahead, using his enhanced agility to weave through the chaos. He had to find the leader and stop them before they could carry out their plan. He followed the scent trail through a maze of crates and machinery, his heart racing. As he rounded a corner, he came face to face with a tall, imposing figure, the leader of the cell. The man's eyes were cold and calculating, filled with a twisted sense of purpose. "So, you found us," the man sneered. "But you're too late. The plan is already in motion." Charlie growled, his hackles raised. He wasn't going to let this man get away. The man pulled out a gun, aiming it at Charlie. "You're not going to stop me, dog." Charlie's mind raced. He had to act fast. Using his enhanced strength and speed, he lunged at the man, knocking the gun from his hand. The man staggered back, cursing as he tried to regain his balance. "Get off me," the man shouted, struggling to free himself. Charlie held his ground, his teeth bared in a fierce snarl. He wasn't going to let this man escape. Just then, Mr. Thompson and Officer Daniels arrived, their faces grim with determination. "Drop it," Mr. Thompson ordered, his voice steady. The man sneered, but he knew he was outnumbered. He raised his hands in surrender, his eyes filled with hatred. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." Mr. Thompson and Officer Daniels quickly secured the man in handcuffs. "We'll see about that," Officer Daniels said, his voice cold. As they led the man away, Mr. Thompson knelt beside Charlie, his eyes filled with pride. "You did it, boy. You found him." Charlie barked softly, his tail wagging. He had stopped the mastermind and protected their town once again. Back at the station, the man was identified as Marcus Black, a high-ranking member of the criminal organization. The officers worked through the night, gathering evidence and dismantling the rest of Black's network. The next morning, as they returned home, Mr. Thompson and Charlie were greeted by the townspeople, their faces filled with gratitude and admiration. "You two are amazing," Mrs. Henderson said, giving Charlie a pat. "We're lucky to have you." Mr. Thompson smiled, looking down at Charlie. "It's all thanks to him. He's the real hero." Charlie barked happily, his heart swelling with pride. He knew there were more challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them. With Mr. Thompson by his side, they could overcome anything. That night, as they sat by the fireplace, Mr. Thompson turned to Charlie with a serious expression. "We did good, boy. But we have to stay vigilant. There's always more to uncover, more threats to face." Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. He was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other. And with Mr. Thompson by his side, he knew they could face any challenge that came their way. Chapter 8. New Challenges. Maplewood had returned to its tranquil routine, but beneath the calm surface, a current of unease persisted. The arrest of Marcus Black had sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld, and Mr. Thompson and Charlie knew it was only a matter of time before they faced new challenges. One morning, as Mr. Thompson and Charlie enjoyed their usual walk down Sycamore Lane, they noticed a group of townspeople gathered outside the local cafe, their faces etched with concern. Mrs. Henderson waved them over. "Mr. Thompson, have you heard the news?" she asked, her voice trembling. "There's been a series of break-ins all over town. People are scared." Mr. Thompson frowned, glancing down at Charlie. "No, I hadn't heard. Any idea who's behind it?" Mrs. Henderson shook her head. "No one knows. The police are investigating, but they haven't found any leads." Charlie's ears perked up, his nose twitching as he picked up faint traces of unfamiliar scents. He barked softly, indicating that he wanted to investigate. Mr. Thompson nodded. "We'll look into it, Mrs. Henderson. Don't worry." They continued their walk, Charlie's senses on high alert. As they neared the park, Charlie suddenly stopped, his body tense. He sniffed the air, his ears straining to catch any sounds. He had picked up a scent that didn't belong, a mix of sweat, leather, and something metallic. "What is it, boy?" Mr. Thompson asked, following Charlie's gaze. Charlie barked and pulled on the leash, leading Mr. Thompson towards a cluster of trees at the edge of the park. They approached cautiously, Charlie's nose guiding them to a hidden spot behind the bushes. There, they found a small bag filled with tools, a crowbar, a lockpick set, and a pair of gloves. "Looks like someone's been busy," Mr. Thompson muttered, examining the tools. "This might be our break-in artist." Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes filled with determination. They had to find out who was behind this and stop them before they could cause more harm. They took the tools to the police station, where Officer Daniels greeted them with a weary smile. "Mr. Thompson, Charlie, good to see you. What have you got there?" "We found these in the park," Mr. Thompson replied, handing over the bag. They might belong to the person behind the break-ins. Officer Daniels examined the tools, his expression serious. This could be the lead we've been looking for. We'll run some tests and see if we can trace them back to their owner. Charlie barked, his tail wagging slightly. He knew they were on the right track. Over the next few days, the police worked tirelessly to analyze the tools and gather more information. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson and Charlie continued their patrols, keeping a close eye on the town. One evening, as they walked through the industrial district, Charlie's enhanced senses picked up the same familiar scent from the park. He barked urgently, pulling Mr. Thompson towards an old, abandoned warehouse. "What is it, boy?" Mr. Thompson asked, his heart pounding with anticipation. Charlie sniffed the ground, his nose leading them to a side entrance. The door was slightly ajar, and faint voices could be heard from inside. "We need to be careful," Mr. Thompson whispered. "Let's see what we're dealing with." They crept inside, staying hidden in the shadows. The warehouse was dimly lit, filled with crates and old machinery. Charlie's ears perked up as he heard the voices more clearly. "We need to move the goods tonight," one voice said. "The boss wants everything out of here before the cops catch on." "Relax," another voice replied. "We've got time. No one knows we're here." Charlie growled softly, his eyes narrowing. These were the people behind the break-ins, and they were planning something big. Mr. Thompson signaled for Charlie to stay low and quiet. They needed to gather more information before making a move. As they crept closer, they could see the men loading crates into a van. "We've hit almost every house on the list," one of the men said. "Just a few more and we're done." Charlie's mind raced. They had to stop these men before they could complete their plans. He nudged Mr. Thompson, who nodded in understanding. "We need to call for backup," Mr. Thompson whispered, pulling out his phone. As he dialed Officer Daniels' number, Charlie kept watch, his senses on high alert. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse as one of the men knocked over a crate. "Who's there?" one of the men shouted, his eyes scanning the shadows. Charlie tensed, ready to spring into action. He barked loudly, drawing the men's attention away from Mr. Thompson. "It's that dog," one of the men shouted, recognizing Charlie. "Get him." The men lunged at Charlie, but he was too quick. Using his enhanced agility, he dodged their attacks and led them on a wild chase around the warehouse. Mr. Thompson quickly relayed their location to Officer Daniels, who promised to send backup immediately. Charlie continued to outmaneuver the men, knocking over crates and causing chaos. Just as he felt his energy waning, he heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Relief washed over him as the police arrived, surrounding the warehouse. "Freeze! Police!" Officer Daniels shouted, his gun drawn. The men skidded to a halt, their faces pale with fear. They raised their hands in surrender as the police swarmed the warehouse, apprehending them one by one. Mr. Thompson rushed to Charlie's side, his eyes filled with pride and concern. "You did it, boy. You bought us enough time." Charlie barked softly, his tail wagging. He had done it. He had stopped the thieves and protected their town once again. As the police secured the warehouse and removed the stolen goods, Officer Daniels approached Mr. Thompson and Charlie, a look of admiration on his face. "You two did it again," he said, clapping Mr. Thompson on the shoulder. "We couldn't have done this without you." Mr. Thompson smiled, looking down at Charlie. "It's all thanks to him. He's the real hero." Charlie barked happily, his heart swelling with pride. He knew there were more challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them. With Mr. Thompson by his side, they could overcome anything. Back at home, Mr. Thompson and Charlie sat by the fireplace, reflecting on the day's events. Mr. Thompson turned to Charlie, his expression serious. "We've done good work, boy, but we have to stay vigilant. There's always more to uncover, more threats to face." Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. He was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other. And with Mr. Thompson by his side, he knew they could face any challenge that came their way. As the days passed, Mr. Thompson and Charlie continued their patrols, always ready for the next challenge. They knew that the fight against crime was never truly over, but they were determined to protect their town and keep it safe. One evening, as they walked through the park, they were approached by a young boy, his eyes wide with admiration. "Are you Mr. Thompson and Charlie?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. Mr. Thompson smiled. "Yes, we are. How can we help you?" The boy grinned, reaching out to pet Charlie. "I just wanted to say thank you. You and Charlie are heroes." Charlie barked softly, nuzzling the boy's hand. He knew that their work made a difference, and that was all the motivation he needed. As they continued their walk, Mr. Thompson looked down at Charlie, his heart swelling with pride. "We've made a difference, boy, and we'll keep doing it, no matter what." Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. He was ready for whatever came next, confident in their ability to overcome any challenge together. With Mr. Thompson by his side, he knew they could face anything the world threw at them. Chapter 9: New Allies. In the weeks following their successful bust of the break-in ring, Maplewood returned to a semblance of normalcy. However, Mr. Thompson and Charlie knew better than to let their guard down. They continued their patrols, always vigilant for the next threat to their town. One crisp morning, as Mr. Thompson and Charlie walked their usual route through Sycamore Lane, they were approached by a woman in her late 30s, with a determined expression on her face and a leash in her hand. Attached to the other end was a sleek German shepherd with intelligent eyes. "Mr. Thompson, Charlie," she greeted them, her voice firm but friendly. "My name is Rebecca Hayes. I've heard a lot about you too." Mr. Thompson nodded, his curiosity piqued. "Nice to meet you, Rebecca. What can we do for you?" Rebecca glanced down at her German shepherd, who stood at attention. "This is Max. He's a trained police dog, and we've recently been transferred to Maplewood. I've been following your work, and I think we could help each other." Charlie sniffed the air, picking up on Max's scent and assessing him. Sensing no immediate threat, he wagged his tail in a friendly manner. Mr. Thompson smiled. "We can always use more help. What did you have in mind?" Rebecca took a deep breath, her eyes shining with determination. "I've been tracking a new player in the criminal underworld, someone who's been moving in on Kane's territory since his arrest. I think we should pool our resources and take them down together." Mr. Thompson's expression grew serious. "Tell us what you know." They walked to a nearby cafe, where they could talk more privately. Rebecca pulled out a folder filled with documents, photos, and maps, spreading them out on the table. "This man," she began, pointing to a photo of a stern-looking individual with a scar running down his cheek. "His name is Dominic Russo. He's been quietly expanding his operations, filling the power vacuum left by Kane. He's dangerous and well-connected." Mr. Thompson studied the photo, his mind racing. "What do we know about his operations?" Rebecca sighed. "He's smart, keeps his activities well hidden, but we've managed to gather some intel. He's planning something big, something that could put a lot of people in danger." Charlie growled softly, sensing the gravity of the situation. Max, too, seemed to understand, his ears perked up and his eyes alert. "We need to stop him before he can carry out his plans," Mr. Thompson said firmly. "What's our next move?" Rebecca nodded, her resolve unwavering. "We've identified a few locations where he might be operating. We should start there, gather more intel, and see if we can disrupt his operations." Over the next few days, the newly formed team of Mr. Thompson, Charlie, Rebecca, and Max worked tirelessly, gathering information and staking out potential locations. They discovered a pattern in Russo's activities, leading them to a warehouse in the industrial district. "This has to be it," Rebecca said, peering through binoculars at the warehouse. "We need to be careful. Russo's men are known for their brutality." Charlie barked in agreement, his senses on high alert. Max stood beside him, equally focused. They planned their approach carefully. Mr. Thompson and Rebecca would create a distraction at the front, while Charlie and Max would sneak in through a side entrance to gather more intel and disable any guards they encountered. As they approached the warehouse, Mr. Thompson and Rebecca moved to the front, engaging the guards in a heated argument about a fake delivery. Meanwhile, Charlie and Max slipped in through a side door, their movements silent and precise. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, filled with crates and equipment. Charlie sniffed the air, detecting the familiar sense of chemicals and metal. He led Max deeper into the warehouse, their eyes scanning for any signs of danger. They found a small office at the back, where a group of men were gathered around a table, discussing their plans. Charlie's enhanced hearing picked up snippets of their conversation. "We need to move the shipment tonight," one of the men said. "Russo wants everything in place by morning." "Relax," another replied. "We've got this. The cops won't know what hit them." Charlie growled softly, his hackles raised. They had to act fast. He nudged Max, who barked in agreement. They needed to signal Mr. Thompson and Rebecca. Using a series of barks and signals they had practiced, Charlie and Max alerted their human partners to the situation. Mr. Thompson and Rebecca quickly subdued the guards at the front and moved in to join them. "What did you find?" Mr. Thompson whispered, crouching beside Charlie. Charlie barked softly, leading them to the office where the men were discussing their plans. Rebecca peered through the door, her eyes narrowing. "That's Russo," she whispered, pointing to a man at the head of the table. "We need to take him down now." Mr. Thompson nodded. "Let's do this." They burst into the office, their presence taking the men by surprise. "Freeze! Police!" Rebecca shouted, her gun drawn. Panic ensued as the men scrambled to escape. Russo's eyes widened with fury as he realized he had been caught. "You'll never take me alive," he snarled, reaching for a gun. Charlie lunged at Russo, knocking the gun from his hand. Max joined in, using his strength to pin Russo to the ground. Mr. Thompson and Rebecca quickly subdued the other men, securing them with handcuffs. "You're done, Russo," Mr. Thompson said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Russo sneered, but he knew he was outnumbered. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." Rebecca tightened the cuffs around his wrists. "We'll see about that." As the police secured the warehouse and removed the illegal goods, Mr. Thompson and Rebecca sat on a crate, catching their breath. Charlie and Max lay at their feet, their bodies still tense from the excitement. "We did it," Rebecca said, her voice filled with relief. "We took down Russo." Mr. Thompson smiled, looking down at Charlie. "It's all thanks to our partners." Charlie barked softly, his tail wagging. He knew there were more challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them. With new allies like Rebecca and Max, they could overcome anything. Back at home, Mr. Thompson and Charlie sat by the fireplace, reflecting on the day's events. Mr. Thompson turned to Charlie, his expression serious. "We've done good work, boy, but we have to stay vigilant. There's always more to uncover, more threats to face." Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. He was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other. And with Mr. Thompson by his side, he knew they could face any challenge that came their way. As the days passed, the bond between the team grew stronger. Mr. Thompson, Charlie, Rebecca, and Max continued their patrols, always ready for the next challenge. They knew that the fight against crime was never truly over, but they were determined to protect their town and keep it safe. One evening, as they walked through the park, they were approached by a young girl, her eyes wide with admiration. "Are you Mr. Thompson and Charlie?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. Mr. Thompson smiled. Yes, we are. How can we help you? The girl grinned, reaching out to pet Charlie. I just wanted to say thank you. You and Charlie are heroes. Charlie barked softly, nuzzling the girl's hand. He knew that their work made a difference, and that was all the motivation he needed. As they continued their walk, Mr. Thompson looked down at Charlie, his heart swelling with pride. We've made a difference, boy, and we'll keep doing it, no matter what. Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. He was ready for whatever came next, confident in their ability to overcome any challenge together. With Mr. Thompson by his side, and now with Rebecca and Max as allies, he knew they could face anything the world threw at them. Chapter 10. The Hidden Threat. The success of their recent operations had given Mr. Thompson, Charlie, Rebecca, and Max a sense of accomplishment, but they knew their work was far from over. They continued their patrols and investigations, always vigilant for new threats. It wasn't long before their peace was shattered by a new, unexpected danger. One evening, as the team gathered at Rebecca's house to discuss their next steps, Charlie's ears perked up. He heard a faint, persistent buzzing sound, one that didn't belong in the quiet neighborhood. He barked softly, alerting the others. What is it, Charlie? Mr. Thompson asked, immediately on edge. Charlie led them outside, his nose twitching as he tried to locate the source of the sound. The buzzing grew louder, and suddenly, a small drone appeared overhead, hovering ominously. Get down, Rebecca shouted, pulling everyone to the ground just as the drone released a burst of smoke. Within seconds, their surroundings were filled with a thick, noxious cloud. Coughing and struggling to see through the smoke, Charlie relied on his enhanced senses to guide him. He heard the faint whir of the drone's rotors and lunged towards it, snapping his jaws around one of its propellers. The drone sputtered and crashed to the ground, but the damage had already been done. Rebecca's eyes watered as she looked at the wrecked drone. Someone's been watching us. This isn't good. Mr. Thompson coughed, his eyes filled with worry. We need to find out who's behind this and why. Charlie barked in agreement, his determination unwavering despite the attack. They had to uncover the hidden threat and stop it before it could cause more harm. Over the next few days, the team analyzed the drone, tracing its components and software to a manufacturer known for selling equipment to private security firms. They discovered that the drone had been modified to carry surveillance and chemical payloads. This isn't just some random attack, Rebecca said, her voice tense. Someone's targeting us specifically. Mr. Thompson nodded. We need to dig deeper. Let's follow the trail and see where it leads. Their investigation led them to a nondescript office building on the outskirts of town. It was owned by a company called Encompass Security Solutions, which specialized in high-tech surveillance and private security contracts. The company's records showed multiple transactions with a shell corporation linked to Dominic Russo. Looks like Russo's reach extends further than we thought, Mr. Thompson muttered. We need to find out who's pulling the strings. As they approached the building, Charlie and Max's ears perked up. They could hear the faint hum of machinery and the murmur of voices inside. The team formulated a plan. Rebecca and Mr. Thompson would create a diversion at the front, while Charlie and Max would sneak in through a side entrance to gather intel. They moved into position, and Mr. Thompson and Rebecca approached the front entrance, pretending to inquire about security services. The receptionist looked wary, but began answering their questions. Meanwhile, Charlie and Max slipped through a side door, moving silently through the building. Charlie's enhanced senses guided them, leading them to a room filled with computer servers and surveillance equipment. They could see a live feed of various locations around town, including their own homes. This is bad, Rebecca whispered into her earpiece, monitoring the feed from her position. They've been watching us for a while. Charlie growled softly, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the computers. They had to find evidence that would link Encompass security solutions to Russo and whoever was orchestrating these attacks. Just then, they heard footsteps approaching. Charlie and Max quickly hid behind a stack of boxes, their eyes alert. A man entered the room, his face partially obscured by the dim light. He sat down at one of the computers, typing rapidly. Charlie recognized the man from the photos they had found during their earlier investigations, Marcus Voss, Russo's right-hand man. He waited until Voss was engrossed in his work before signaling Max. They moved silently, positioning themselves for a surprise attack. Max barked loudly, causing Voss to jump in his seat. Before he could react, Charlie lunged at him, knocking him to the ground. Max secured Voss's hands with his teeth, preventing him from reaching for a weapon. "Get off me," Voss shouted, struggling to break free. Mr. Thompson and Rebecca rushed in, their expressions filled with determination. "You're not going anywhere," Mr. Thompson said, his voice cold. Rebecca quickly searched the room, finding files and electronic devices that linked Encompass security solutions to the Shell Corporation and ultimately to Russo. "We've got the evidence we need," she said, holding up a flash drive. "This is going to bring them down." Voss sneered, but his eyes betrayed his fear. "You think you've won? This is just the beginning." Mr. Thompson's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." As they secured Voss and gathered the evidence, the police arrived to take him into custody. Officer Daniels shook his head in disbelief. "You've uncovered a major operation here. This evidence is going to put a lot of people behind bars." Charlie barked softly, his tail wagging. He knew they had made a significant breakthrough, but he also knew that the fight was far from over. Back at Rebecca's house, the team reviewed the evidence they had collected. The flash drive contained detailed plans for further attacks, as well as communications between Russo and a shadowy figure known only as the Broker. "This broker seems to be the mastermind behind all of this," Rebecca said, her voice filled with determination. "We need to find out who he is and stop him." Mr. Thompson nodded. "We'll need to be careful. The broker is clearly well-connected and dangerous." Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes filled with determination. They had come this far, and he wasn't about to back down now. As they continued their investigation, they discovered that the broker was planning a major attack on a public event in Maplewood. The target was the annual Maplewood Fair, a beloved community event that attracted hundreds of residents. "We have to stop this," Rebecca said, her voice filled with urgency. "The fair is in 2 days. We need to find the broker and prevent the attack." The team worked around the clock, following leads and piecing together clues. Charlie's enhanced senses guided them, helping to track down key pieces of information. They discovered that the broker was planning to use a network of operatives to plant explosives at the fair. On the day of the fair, the team coordinated with the police to set up a sting operation. They positioned officers and undercover agents throughout the fairgrounds, ready to intercept any suspicious activity. Charlie and Max patrolled the area, their senses on high alert. They could feel the tension in the air, knowing that any misstep could lead to disaster. As the fair went on, Charlie caught a familiar scent, a mix of chemicals and metal. He barked urgently, leading Mr. Thompson and Max to a food truck parked near the main stage. They approached cautiously, and Charlie sniffed around the truck, his nose guiding him to a hidden compartment. Inside, they found a device wired to explosives, set to detonate during the evening's fireworks display. Mr. Thompson quickly radioed the bomb squad, who arrived to defuse the device. "Good work, Charlie," Mr. Thompson said, his voice filled with relief. "But we're not done yet. There could be more." Charlie barked in agreement, his senses still on high alert. They continued their patrol, and soon Max caught the scent of another device near the Ferris wheel. They repeated their actions, alerting the bomb squad, who safely disarmed the second device. The evening was drawing to a close when they received word from Officer Daniels. "We've got him," he said. "The broker is here, trying to flee the scene." Charlie and Max raced to the location, their hearts pounding. They found Officer Daniels and his team surrounding a man in a dark suit, his face filled with cold calculation. It was the broker. "It's over," Mr. Thompson said, his voice steady. "You're under arrest." The broker sneered. "You think you've stopped me? There will always be others to take my place." Rebecca tightened the handcuffs around his wrists. "Maybe, but you won't be causing any more harm." As the broker was led away, the townspeople cheered, their gratitude and relief palpable. Charlie barked happily, his tail wagging. He knew they had made a significant impact, but he also knew that the fight against crime was never truly over. Back at home, Mr. Thompson and Charlie sat by the fireplace, reflecting on the day's events. Mr. Thompson turned to Charlie, his expression serious. "We've done good work, boy, but we have to stay vigilant. There's always more to uncover, more threats to face." Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. He was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other. And with Mr. Thompson by his side, he knew they could face any challenge that came their way. As the days passed, the bond between the team grew stronger. Mr. Thompson, Charlie, Rebecca, and Max continued their patrols, always ready for the next challenge. They knew that the fight against crime was never truly over, but they were determined to protect their town and keep it safe. Chapter 11. Unlikely Allies. The defeat of the broker and the prevention of the Maplewood Fair attack had solidified the reputation of Mr. Thompson, Charlie, Rebecca, and Max as the town's protectors. However, even with their success, the team remained vigilant, knowing that the criminal underworld would soon attempt to fill the power vacuum left by the broker's arrest. One crisp autumn morning, as the team gathered at the local cafe to discuss their next steps, a stranger approached their table. He was a tall, lean man with a scruffy beard and sharp eyes, dressed in a worn leather jacket. "Mr. Thompson, Rebecca, mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of urgency. Mr. Thompson eyed the man warily. "Depends on who you are." The man nodded, pulling out a worn ID badge and placing it on the table. "Name's Alex Harper. Used to be an undercover cop in the city. I've been tracking a new threat that's heading your way." Rebecca picked up the badge, scrutinizing it before nodding. "All right, Alex. What's this threat you're talking about?" Alex leaned in, his expression serious. "There's a new player in the game. Goes by the name of Silas Kane. He's Dominic Russo's brother, and he's coming to Maplewood to exact revenge for his brother's arrest." Charlie growled softly, sensing the gravity of the situation. Max's ears perked up, indicating his readiness for action. Mr. Thompson exchanged a glance with Rebecca. "What do you know about Silas?" Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Silas is ruthless, more so than his brother. He's built an empire on fear and violence. If he's coming here, it's because he has a plan and it's going to be big." Rebecca nodded. "All right, Alex. We could use your help. What's your plan?" Alex smirked. "Glad you asked. We need to gather intel, find out where Silas is operating from, and take him down before he can put his plan into action." Over the next few days, Alex worked closely with the team, sharing his knowledge of Silas's operations and tactics. They discovered that Silas had already set up a network of informants and enforcers throughout Maplewood, waiting for the right moment to strike. One evening, as the team reviewed their findings at Rebecca's house, Charlie's ears perked up. He heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching the house, followed by a soft tap on the window. He barked softly, alerting the others. "Someone's outside," Mr. Thompson said, moving towards the window. Rebecca peeked through the curtain, her eyes narrowing. "It's a woman. She looks scared." They opened the door to find a young woman, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "Please, you have to help me," she pleaded. "Silas Kane is after me. I tried to leave his gang, but now he's hunting me down." Alex stepped forward, his expression serious. "What's your name?" "Lena," she replied, her voice trembling. "Lena Smith. I was part of Silas's inner circle, but I couldn't take it anymore. He's planning something big, and it's going to happen soon." Mr. Thompson nodded. "Come inside, Lena. You're safe here. Tell us everything you know." As they sat around the table, Lena recounted her experiences with Silas. She described his brutal methods, his vast network of criminal activities, and his plan to launch a series of attacks across Maplewood to create chaos and seize control. "He has safe houses all over town," Lena said, her voice shaking. "He's been stockpiling weapons and explosives. The first attack is set for tomorrow night." Charlie growled, his hackles raised. Max barked in agreement, sensing the urgency of the situation. "We need to act fast," Alex said, his eyes burning with determination. "We need to hit those safe houses and stop this before it starts." The team quickly formulated a plan. They would split into pairs. Mr. Thompson and Charlie would take one side of town, while Rebecca, Max, and Alex would cover the other. Lena provided them with the locations of the safe houses, and they moved out under the cover of darkness. As Mr. Thompson and Charlie approached the first safe house, a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town, Charlie's enhanced senses picked up the scent of gunpowder and sweat. He barked softly, indicating that the building was occupied. "Stay low and follow my lead," Mr. Thompson whispered, moving towards a side entrance. Inside, they found a group of men loading crates of weapons into a van. Mr. Thompson signaled for Charlie to move in, and they quickly subdued the guards, securing the weapons and calling in the police to confiscate the supplies. "One down," Mr. Thompson said, his voice steady. "Let's keep moving." Meanwhile, Rebecca, Max, and Alex encountered fierce resistance at their first target, a heavily guarded safe house near the town center. Max's keen senses alerted them to hidden traps and guards, allowing them to navigate the building safely. As they engaged in a tense firefight with Silas's men, Rebecca spotted a familiar face among the attackers. "It's one of the broker's operatives," she shouted. "They're working together." The revelation added a new layer of complexity to their mission. They fought their way through the building, disabling the traps and capturing the operatives. Alex quickly relayed the information to Mr. Thompson. "We've got a problem," Alex said over the radio. "Silas is working with the broker's network. This is bigger than we thought." Mr. Thompson's expression hardened. "Understood. Stay safe and keep moving." As they moved to the next location, Mr. Thompson and Charlie encountered a group of armed men patrolling the area. Using Charlie's agility and enhanced senses, they managed to outmaneuver the guards and disable the next cache of weapons. "Two down," Mr. Thompson muttered, sweat trickling down his forehead. "Just a few more to go." The night continued in a blur of action and tension. The team moved from one safe house to another, disabling weapons and capturing operatives. The realization that Silas was working with the broker's network added urgency to their mission, and they fought with renewed determination. Finally, as dawn approached, they converged on the last safe house, a fortified compound in the heart of Maplewood. Silas himself was inside, surrounded by his most loyal enforcers. "This is it," Alex said, his voice filled with resolve. "We take down Silas, and we cut the head off the snake." They moved in, breaching the compound with precision and skill. A fierce battle erupted, with gunfire and explosions echoing through the air. Charlie and Max led the charge, their agility and senses giving them an edge in the chaotic environment. As they fought their way to the central room, they found Silas waiting for them, a sinister smile on his face. "You think you can stop me?" he sneered. "You're too late." The attack is already in motion. Mr. Thompson stepped forward, his eyes burning with determination. We'll see about that. Silas lunged at him, a knife in his hand. Charlie intercepted him, using his enhanced strength to knock the weapon from his grasp. Max joined in, pinning Silas to the ground. "You're done, Silas," Rebecca said, her voice cold. "It's over." As the police moved in to secure the compound and arrest Silas's men, Mr. Thompson and Charlie stood by, their bodies tense and their minds racing. They had stopped the immediate threat, but the realization that Silas was working with the broker's network meant that their fight was far from over. Back at Rebecca's house, the team reviewed the night's events, their faces etched with fatigue, but also with a sense of accomplishment. "We did it," Alex said, his voice filled with relief. "We stopped Silas and prevented the attack." Rebecca nodded. "But we still have work to do. We need to dismantle the broker's network and ensure that no one else takes Silas's place." Mr. Thompson looked down at Charlie, his eyes filled with pride and determination. "We'll do whatever it takes." Charlie barked softly, his tail wagging. He knew that their work made a difference, and he was ready to continue the fight. As they sat by the fireplace, reflecting on the day's events, Mr. Thompson turned to Charlie with a serious expression. "We've done good work, boy, but we have to stay vigilant. There's always more to uncover, more threats to face." Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. He was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other. And with Mr. Thompson, Rebecca, Max, and now Alex by his side, he knew they could face any challenge that came their way. Chapter 12. A Test of Loyalty. The capture of Silas Kane had been a significant victory for the team, but the revelation that he was working with the broker's network left them on edge. As they continued to dismantle the criminal organization, tensions began to rise within the team. They all knew that the fight was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. One evening, as they gathered at Rebecca's house to discuss their next steps, an unexpected visitor arrived. It was Lena, the young woman who had provided them with critical information about Silas's operations. She looked even more frightened than before, her eyes darting around nervously. "Lena, what's wrong?" Rebecca asked, guiding her to a chair. Lena took a deep breath, her voice shaking. "I've been trying to stay hidden, but they found me. Silas's remaining men, they're coming for me." Mr. Thompson's expression hardened. "You're safe here, Lena. We'll protect you." Charlie barked softly, sensing Lena's fear. Max nuzzled her hand, offering silent comfort. Lena's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, but there's something else you need to know. Before I left, I overheard a conversation. The broker has someone inside your team, feeding him information." A stunned silence fell over the room. Rebecca's eyes widened, and Alex's jaw tightened. Mr. Thompson glanced at Charlie, who growled softly, his hackles raised. "We need to figure out who it is," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the shock. "This is too important to let slide." Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes scanning the room. He trusted his team, but the possibility of a traitor among them shook him to his core. The next day, tensions were high as they continued their work. The trust they had built over the past months felt fragile, and every glance and gesture seemed loaded with suspicion. They had to find the mole before it was too late. As they gathered around the table, reviewing their latest intel, Alex spoke up. "We need to be smart about this. If we start accusing each other without proof, we'll tear ourselves apart. We need to set a trap." Mr. Thompson nodded. "Agreed. We'll feed false information about a supposed operation and see if it gets back to the broker." Rebecca looked around the room, her eyes lingering on each of them. "We all need to be on board with this. It's the only way to flush out the mole." Charlie barked, indicating his agreement. Max, too, wagged his tail in solidarity. They devised a plan, carefully crafting a fake operation to be carried out in the abandoned warehouse district. They made sure each team member knew the details, then waited to see what would happen. As they moved through the motions of their daily routines, the tension was palpable. Charlie's enhanced senses were on high alert, picking up every sound and scent, trying to detect any signs of betrayal. The night of the fake operation arrived. The team gathered at the warehouse, ready to spring their trap. They waited in silence, the minutes ticking by painfully slowly. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the empty building. Charlie's ears perked up, and he barked softly to alert the others. They moved into position, ready to confront whoever showed up. A figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light. It was one of Silas's men, his face twisted in a sneer. "You thought you could trap us? We knew this was a setup." Mr. Thompson stepped forward, his eyes cold. "Then why show up?" The man laughed. "To show you that we're always one step ahead." Before anyone could react, a flashbang went off, filling the room with blinding light and deafening noise. In the chaos, the man escaped, leaving the team disoriented and frustrated. "We need to get out of here," Rebecca shouted, her voice barely audible over the ringing in their ears. Charlie led the way, guiding them through the haze and out of the warehouse. Once they were safe, they regrouped, their faces etched with anger and determination. "Someone tipped them off," Alex said, his voice cold. "We need to figure out who." Rebecca nodded, her eyes fierce. "And fast. They won't stop until they've destroyed us." Back at Rebecca's house, they sat around the table, the atmosphere tense. Mr. Thompson turned to Lena, who looked pale and frightened. "Lena, are you sure about what you heard?" Lena nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sure. Someone on your team is working for the broker." Charlie's eyes scanned the room, searching for any signs of deception. He trusted his team, but the seed of doubt had been planted. "We need to rethink our strategy," Mr. Thompson said, his voice steady. "We can't let this tear us apart. We have to work together and find out who the mole is." Rebecca sighed, her shoulders slumping. "This is tearing us apart. We need a way to prove our loyalty to each other." Alex leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "What if we each take a polygraph test? It's not foolproof, but it's a start." Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes reflecting his unwavering loyalty to the team. Max, too, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Over the next few days, they arranged for a polygraph expert to test each team member. The tension was palpable as they took turns, the weight of suspicion heavy on their shoulders. When it was Charlie's turn, he sat still, his eyes focused on Mr. Thompson. He knew his loyalty was unquestionable, but the test was necessary to clear his name. "Do you have any knowledge of the mole?" the polygraph expert asked, her voice calm and professional. Charlie barked once, the machine recording his response. "Have you ever intentionally given information to the broker or his associates?" she continued. Charlie barked again, his eyes steady. The expert nodded, looking at the results. Charlie's responses indicate no deception. Mr. Thompson sighed with relief, patting Charlie on the head. "Good boy." As the tests continued, each team member was cleared, but the sense of unease remained. They knew the mole could still be among them, using more sophisticated methods to avoid detection. One evening, as Mr. Thompson and Charlie patrolled the town, they noticed a figure lurking in the shadows. Charlie's ears perked up, and he growled softly, signaling Mr. Thompson to be cautious. They approached the figure, who turned out to be one of their trusted informants. "Mr. Thompson, Charlie," he whispered urgently, "I have information about the mole. Meet me at the old factory in an hour." Mr. Thompson nodded, his heart racing. "We'll be there." They arrived at the factory, the air thick with tension. The informant was waiting, his eyes darting nervously. I found out who the mole is, he said, his voice shaking. It's Alex. He's been working for the broker all along. Mr. Thompson's eyes widened in shock. Alex? Are you sure? The informant nodded. I have proof. I intercepted a message he sent to the broker, detailing your plans. Charlie growled, his eyes narrowing. They had to confront Alex and get to the bottom of this. Back at Rebecca's house, they called an emergency meeting. Alex arrived, his expression neutral. What's going on? Mr. Thompson fixed him with a steely gaze. We know you're the mole, Alex. We have proof. Alex's eyes widened, and he took a step back. What are you talking about? I'm not a traitor. Rebecca held up the intercepted message. Explain this, then. Alex's face paled as he realized he had been caught. I had no choice, he said, his voice filled with desperation. The broker threatened my family. I had to give him information to keep them safe. Mr. Thompson's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. You should have come to us. We could have helped you. Alex's shoulders slumped in defeat. I'm sorry. I never wanted to betray you. Rebecca nodded, her expression conflicted. We understand, but you need to face the consequences of your actions. Charlie barked softly, his eyes reflecting both sympathy and resolve. They had to protect the team and ensure justice was served. As the police took Alex into custody, the team felt a mixture of relief and sadness. They had uncovered the mole, but at a great cost. Trust had been shaken, and they knew it would take time to rebuild. Back at Rebecca's house, they sat around the table, the atmosphere heavy with emotion. Mr. Thompson looked at each of them, his eyes filled with determination. We've been through a lot, but we've come out stronger. We need to stay united and keep fighting for what's right. Charlie barked in agreement, his tail wagging. He knew that their bond was unbreakable and together, they could face any challenge. As they sat by the fireplace, reflecting on the day's events, Mr. Thompson turned to Charlie with a serious expression. We've done good work, boy, but we have to stay vigilant. There's always more to uncover, more threats to face. Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. He was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other. And with Mr. Thompson, Rebecca, Max, and the remaining loyal team members by his side, he knew they could face any challenge that came their way. Chapter 13. The Final Showdown. In the aftermath of Alex's betrayal, the team's trust was tested like never before. Despite the emotional toll, Mr. Thompson, Charlie, Rebecca, and Max remained steadfast in their mission to protect Maplewood. They knew that with the broker's network still active, their fight was far from over. One chilly evening, as they gathered at Rebecca's house to regroup and plan their next steps, Charlie's ears perked up. He heard a familiar voice outside, a voice he hadn't heard in a while. He barked softly, alerting the team. What is it, boy? Mr. Thompson asked, moving to the window. Outside, they saw a man standing in the shadows, his face partially obscured. Mr. Thompson's eyes widened in recognition. It's Jacob Stark, he whispered, the man they had previously put behind bars. Rebecca's face hardened. What is he doing here? They opened the door cautiously, and Stark stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. I'm not here to cause trouble. I have information you need. Mr. Thompson eyed him warily. Why should we trust you? Stark sighed, his expression weary. Because the broker double-crossed me. He used me, then left me to rot in jail. I want to see him go down as much as you do. Charlie growled softly, his instincts conflicted. While he didn't trust Stark, he sensed desperation and sincerity in the man's voice. Rebecca crossed her arms, her eyes piercing. All right, talk. What do you know? Stark nodded, stepping inside. The broker is planning one last major operation. He's pulling out all the stops. If you don't stop him now, Maplewood will be destroyed. Mr. Thompson's eyes narrowed. What's the plan? Stark took a deep breath. He's planning to rig the town's water supply with explosives. He wants to cause chaos and blame it on you, turning the town against you once and for all. Charlie barked urgently, his hackles raised. They had to act fast. Rebecca's eyes widened. When is this supposed to happen? Tomorrow night, Stark replied. He's already started planting the explosives. You have less than 24 hours to stop him. Mr. Thompson exchanged a glance with Rebecca. We need to move now. The team quickly formulated a plan. They would split into pairs to cover more ground. Mr. Thompson and Charlie would check the water treatment plant, while Rebecca and Max would inspect the main pipelines around town. Stark, under strict supervision, would help guide them to the critical points. As they moved through the darkened streets of Maplewood, Charlie's enhanced senses were on high alert. He could smell the faint scent of explosives and hear the distant hum of machinery. They had to find the devices and disarm them before it was too late. At the water treatment plant, Mr. Thompson and Charlie moved cautiously through the facility. Charlie sniffed the air, leading them to a large storage tank. He barked softly, indicating the presence of explosives. Mr. Thompson knelt beside the tank, his eyes scanning for any signs of tampering. Good job, Charlie. Now we just need to find a way to disarm it. Charlie's eyes darted around, searching for any clues. He spotted a small device attached to the side of the tank, wires snaking out from it. He barked again, drawing Mr. Thompson's attention to it. Mr. Thompson carefully examined the device. Looks like a time detonator. We need to cut the right wires to disarm it. Charlie watched intently as Mr. Thompson worked, his heart pounding. He trusted Mr. Thompson, but the stakes had never been higher. Meanwhile, Rebecca and Max were making their way through the main pipelines, guided by Stark. They found another set of explosives hidden in a maintenance tunnel. Rebecca's hands shook as she worked to disarm the device, Max standing guard beside her. Almost there, Rebecca muttered, her eyes focused on the wires. Just a little more. Suddenly, they heard footsteps echoing through the tunnel. Max growled, his body tensing. Stark's face paled. It's the broker's men. They're here to stop us. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. We need to finish this. Max, keep them back. Max barked in acknowledgement, moving to intercept the approaching figures. Rebecca's hands moved swiftly, cutting the final wire and disarming the device, just as Max lunged at the first attacker. Back at the water treatment plant, Mr. Thompson had successfully disarmed the first device. One down, he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Let's move to the next one. Charlie barked in agreement, leading the way to the next storage tank. They repeated the process, disarming device after device, knowing that every second counted. As they approached the final tank, they heard a chilling voice behind them. You're too late, Thompson. Mr. Thompson and Charlie turned to see the broker standing there, a smug smile on his face. I knew you'd try to stop me, but you can't save everyone. Charlie growled, his eyes locked on the broker. He sensed the danger and the malice in the man's voice. We'll see about that, Mr. Thompson said, his voice cold. Charlie now. Charlie lunged at the broker, knocking him to the ground. The broker struggled, trying to reach for a concealed weapon, but Charlie's strength and agility kept him pinned. Mr. Thompson quickly moved to disarm the final device, his hands steady and sure. As he cut the last wire, the device powered down with a soft whir. It's over, broker, Mr. Thompson said, his voice filled with determination. You've lost. The broker sneered, but his eyes were filled with fear. This isn't over. There will always be others. Rebecca, Max, and Stark arrived, their faces etched with relief and exhaustion. We did it, Rebecca said, her voice filled with a mixture of triumph and weariness. Charlie barked happily, his tail wagging. He knew they had made a significant impact, but the fight against crime was never truly over. The police arrived to take the broker into custody, securing the explosives and ensuring the safety of the town. Officer Daniels shook his head in disbelief. "You've saved us all again. Thank you." Mr. Thompson smiled, looking down at Charlie. "It's all thanks to our partners." Charlie barked softly, his heart swelling with pride. He knew that their work made a difference, and he was ready to continue the fight. Back at Rebecca's house, the team gathered to reflect on the day's events. Stark, now under police protection, sat with them, his expression conflicted. "You did the right thing, Stark," Mr. Thompson said, his voice gentle but firm. "You helped us save lives." Stark nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you. I want to make things right." Rebecca smiled, her eyes warm. "You're on the right path. We'll help you." As they sat by the fireplace, the atmosphere was filled with a sense of accomplishment and renewed determination. Mr. Thompson turned to Charlie with a serious expression. "We've done good work, boy, but we have to stay vigilant. There's always more to uncover, more threats to face." Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. He was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other. And with Mr. Thompson, Rebecca, Max, and now Stark by his side, he knew they could face any challenge that came their way. As the days passed, the bond between the team grew stronger. Mr. Thompson, Charlie, Rebecca, Max, and Stark continued their patrols, always ready for the next challenge. They knew that the fight against crime was never truly over, but they were determined to protect their town and keep it safe. One evening, as they walked through the park, they were approached by a group of children, their eyes wide with admiration. "Are you Mr. Thompson and Charlie?" one of the boys asked, his voice filled with awe. Mr. Thompson smiled. "Yes, we are. How can we help you?" The boy grinned, reaching out to pet Charlie. "I just wanted to say thank you. You and Charlie are heroes." Charlie barked softly, nuzzling the boy's hand. He knew that their work made a difference, and that was all the motivation he needed. As they continued their walk, Mr. Thompson looked down at Charlie, his heart swelling with pride. "We've made a difference, boy, and we'll keep doing it, no matter what." Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. He was ready for whatever came next, confident in their ability to overcome any challenge together. With Mr. Thompson by his side, and now with Rebecca, Max, and Stark as allies, he knew they could face anything the world threw at them. Epilogue, a hero's life. Months had passed since the dramatic takedown of the broker, and Maplewood had finally returned to a semblance of peace. The town's residents went about their daily lives with a newfound sense of security, knowing that their protectors were always watching over them. Mr. Thompson, Charlie, Rebecca, Max, and Stark continued their patrols, but the intense threats seemed to have subsided. One crisp autumn morning, Mr. Thompson and Charlie were enjoying their usual walk through Sycamore Lane. The leaves had turned vibrant shades of red and gold, and the air was filled with the scent of apples and cinnamon from the nearby bakery. Charlie's tail wagged happily as he sniffed the air, soaking in the tranquility. "Feels good to have some peace for once, doesn't it, boy?" Mr. Thompson said, smiling down at Charlie. Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes sparkling with contentment. They had earned this moment of respite, but he remained vigilant, ready for any signs of trouble. As they approached the park, they saw a familiar face. Officer Daniels was leaning against his patrol car, waiting for them. His expression was a mix of relief and concern. "Morning, Thompson." "Charlie," Daniels greeted them. "Got a minute?" Mr. Thompson nodded. "Of course. What's going on?" Daniels sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We've got a situation. A new player has moved into town, trying to fill the void left by the broker and Silas Kane. We've been getting reports of increased criminal activity. Charlie growled softly, his senses on high alert. The peace they had fought so hard for was being threatened once again. Who is it this time? Mr. Thompson asked, his expression hardening. Daniels handed him a folder. Name's Victor Marlowe. Ex-military turned mercenary. He's ruthless and has connections all over the country. We've been tracking his movements, and it looks like he's setting up operations here. Mr. Thompson flipped through the folder, his jaw tightening as he read the details. We'll need to act fast. Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes filled with determination. They had faced dangerous enemies before, and they would do it again. Later that day, the team gathered at Rebecca's house to discuss their strategy. Rebecca, Max, and Stark listened intently as Mr. Thompson relayed the information about Marlowe. "This guy sounds like trouble," Rebecca said, her brow furrowed. "We need to find out where he's operating from and shut him down before he can establish a foothold." Stark nodded, his expression grim. "I've heard of Marlowe. He's bad news. We'll need to be careful." Charlie's ears perked up as he heard a faint rustling outside. He barked softly, alerting the team to the presence of someone nearby. "Stay here," Mr. Thompson said, moving to the window. He peeked outside, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a figure lurking in the shadows. "We've got company." Rebecca grabbed her gun, and Max moved to stand by the door, his body tense. "Who is it?" "Not sure," Mr. Thompson replied, "but we're about to find out." They moved cautiously to the door, opening it to find a young woman standing there, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "Please, I need your help," she said, her voice trembling. "Marlowe's men, they're after me." Mr. Thompson and Rebecca exchanged a glance before ushering her inside. "You're safe here. What's your name?" Rebecca asked gently. "Emily," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emily Carter. I was working for Marlowe, but I couldn't do it anymore. I tried to leave, but now they're hunting me down." Charlie sniffed the air, picking up the scent of fear and desperation. He nuzzled Emily's hand, offering silent comfort. "We'll protect you, Emily," Mr. Thompson said firmly. "But we need you to tell us everything you know about Marlowe's operations." Emily nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "He's planning something big. He has safe houses all over town, and he's been stockpiling weapons and supplies. He's planning to take over Maplewood." Rebecca's eyes widened. "We need to move fast. Do you know where any of these safe houses are?" Emily took a deep breath. "Yes, I can show you." The team quickly formulated a plan. They would split into pairs to cover more ground. Mr. Thompson and Charlie would take one side of town, while Rebecca, Max, and Stark would cover the other. Emily would guide them to the safe houses, providing crucial information. As they moved through the darkened streets of Maplewood, Charlie's enhanced senses were on high alert. He could smell the faint scent of gunpowder and hear the distant hum of machinery. They had to find the safe houses and shut them down before it was too late. At the first location, an abandoned warehouse, Mr. Thompson and Charlie moved cautiously through the building. Charlie sniffed the air, leading them to a hidden room filled with crates of weapons and supplies. He barked softly, indicating the presence of explosives. "Good job, Charlie," Mr. Thompson said, his eyes scanning the room. "We need to disable these before they can be used." Charlie watched intently as Mr. Thompson worked, his heart pounding. He trusted Mr. Thompson, but the stakes had never been higher. Meanwhile, Rebecca, Max, and Stark were making their way through the main pipelines, guided by Emily. They found another set of explosives hidden in a maintenance tunnel. Rebecca's hands shook as she worked to disarm the device, Max standing guard beside her. "We've got this," Stark said, his voice steady. "Just a little more." Suddenly, They heard footsteps echoing through the tunnel. Max growled, his body tensing. Emily's face paled. It's Marlowe's men. They're here to stop us. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. We need to finish this. Max, keep them back. Max barked in acknowledgement, moving to intercept the approaching figures. Rebecca's hands moved swiftly, cutting the final wire and disarming the device, just as Max lunged at the first attacker. Back at the warehouse, Mr. Thompson and Charlie had successfully disabled the explosives. One down, Mr. Thompson said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Let's keep moving. Charlie barked in agreement, leading the way to the next location. They repeated the process, disabling device after device, knowing that every second counted. As they approached the final safe house, they heard a chilling voice behind them. You're too late, Thompson. Mr. Thompson and Charlie turned to see Victor Marlowe standing there, a smug smile on his face. I knew you'd try to stop me, but you can't save everyone. Charlie growled, his eyes locked on Marlowe. He sensed the danger and the malice in the man's voice. We'll see about that, Mr. Thompson said, his voice cold. Charlie now. Charlie lunged at Marlowe, knocking him to the ground. Marlowe struggled, trying to reach for a concealed weapon, but Charlie's strength and agility kept him pinned. Mr. Thompson quickly moved to disarm the final device, his hands steady and sure. As he cut the last wire, the device powered down with a soft whir. It's over, Marlowe, Mr. Thompson said, his voice filled with determination. You've lost. Marlowe sneered, but his eyes were filled with fear. This isn't over. There will always be others. Rebecca, Max, Stark, and Emily arrived, their faces etched with relief and exhaustion. We did it, Rebecca said, her voice filled with a mixture of triumph and weariness. Charlie barked happily, his tail wagging. He knew they had made a significant impact, but the fight against crime was never truly over. The police arrived to take Marlowe into custody, securing the explosives and ensuring the safety of the town. Officer Daniels shook his head in disbelief. You've saved us all again. Thank you. Mr. Thompson smiled, looking down at Charlie. It's all thanks to our partners. Charlie barked softly, his heart swelling with pride. He knew that their work made a difference, and he was ready to continue the fight. Back at Rebecca's house, the team gathered to reflect on the day's events. Emily, now under police protection, sat with them, her expression filled with gratitude. You saved my life, Emily said, her voice trembling. Thank you. Mr. Thompson nodded. We're just glad you're safe. You did the right thing coming to us. Rebecca smiled, her eyes warm. You're on the right path. We'll help you. As they sat by the fireplace, the atmosphere was filled with a sense of accomplishment and renewed determination. Mr. Thompson turned to Charlie with a serious expression. We've done good work, boy, but we have to stay vigilant. There's always more to uncover, more threats to face. Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. He was ready to embrace his role as the city's unlikely hero, a detective dog like no other. And with Mr. Thompson, Rebecca, Max, Stark, and now Emily by his side, he knew they could face any challenge that came their way. As the days passed, the bond between the team grew stronger. Mr. Thompson, Charlie, Rebecca, Max, Stark, and Emily continued their patrols, always ready for the next challenge. They knew that the fight against crime was never truly over, but they were determined to protect their town and keep it safe. One evening, as they walked through the park, they were approached by a group of children, their eyes wide with admiration. Are you Mr. Thompson and Charlie? One of the boys asked, his voice filled with awe. Mr. Thompson smiled. Yes, we are. How can we help you? The boy grinned, reaching out to pet Charlie. I just wanted to say thank you. You and Charlie are heroes. Charlie barked softly, nuzzling the boy's hand. He knew that their work made a difference, and that was all the motivation he needed. As they continued their walk, Mr. Thompson looked down at Charlie, his heart swelling with pride. "We've made a difference, boy, and we'll keep doing it, no matter what." Charlie barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. He was ready for whatever came next, confident in their ability to overcome any challenge together. With Mr. Thompson by his side, and now with Rebecca, Max, Stark, and Emily as allies, he knew they could face anything the world threw at them. And so, the team continued their mission, united by their shared purpose and their unwavering commitment to justice. They knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but they were ready to face them head-on, knowing that together, they could protect their town and keep it safe for generations to come.